just because they have not told the point yet, does not mean they're going to play. All they're doing now, planning on and plotting ahead. The season will just begin later.
Good morning, everybody. We're just letting everyone sort of join the room, and we'll get started shortly. My name is Will Wright. I'm here with the Los Angeles chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and this is the 6th in our 7-part series, Designing the Future, which we really meant that with a little bit of levity. We're really thankful to the presenting sponsor for this program, Chu plus Gooding Architects. Today's conversation will focus on multifamily residential, but it will also focus on the neighborhoods that are the homes to our multifamily residential projects. We're delighted to have 5 distinguished speakers here. And for today's program, we're going to try to keep the conversation as interactive as possible with those 5 speakers. But a few of the speakers will be sharing images throughout their discussion. So with that, I want to welcome Yaku Askew from YA Studio, David Baker from David Baker Architects, Julie Eisenberg from Koenig Eisenberg, Daniel Gieman from WHA Architects, and Karin Liljegren from Omgivning. And one day I'll be able to pronounce all of that correctly, and I really look forward to that. But with that, Yaku, we're going to go to you first, and look forward to just a self-introduction, and then if we go through everybody really quickly, then we'll go back and we'll start the conversation afterwards.
Sounds good. So I'm Yaku Askew. I was actually born and raised in San Francisco. Went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo about 15 years ago after working at a couple different size firms. Started my own studio, YA Studio. We are focused primarily on affordable housing in the Bay Area. So it's about 75% of our work, but we also try to keep things pretty diverse. And so we do restaurants, bars, custom homes, vacation homes in the Lake Tahoe area. So kind of 2 ends of the spectrum, doing some, 10,000 square foot houses and affordable housing in the Bay Area. So keeping things mixed up, but glad to be here today.
Thank you. And now we'll go to David Baker.
Hi, David Baker, architect in San Francisco as well. I think we're neighbors usually. And glad to be here this morning. I have some slides, but maybe I'll forgo them and we'll see if they fit somewhere. I have a few just talking about my own obsessions with providing private open space and affordable housing, which is become, in Northern California, actually pretty much forbidden. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me and happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Thank you so much. And now, Julie Eisenberg. Julie, you're on mute. There we go.
Hi, my name's Julie Eisenberg, and I'm now not on mute, and I'm in Santa Monica, and we've been focusing on strengthening neighborhood for some 30, 40 years now, and each time we learn more, and I'm actually interested in this forum to find out what I can find out from you about what's happening around the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Daniel.
Yes, sir. I'm Daniel Gaiman, also architect. I'm with WHA Architects with offices in Santa Ana, Long Beach, and San Ramon. So David and Yaku, we could be neighbors too when I get up there. I have been personally involved in multifamily housing for the last 2 decades and have grown increasingly more passionate about it and therefore focused on it. I joined this firm last year and have now been exposed to a company that does all scales of housing, from single-family detached production homes across the country to high-density, double podium, urban infill stuff, both for rent and for sale. So we pretty much cover the entire spectrum. I have a couple of images too, but it really has to do with some prototypical things we've been working on that have to do with gentle density. typically, which I think is one of the absolute solutions we have to look for in terms of attainable housing.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Karin, welcome.
Hi, I'm Karin Liljegren. I'm the principal and founder of Omgivning. We're an architecture and interiors firm in downtown LA. We're about 10 years old. I've been focusing on personally multifamily for about 20 years and adaptive reuse projects. Our firm focuses on adaptive reuse projects and mostly downtown LA, but also around, and we're expanding. But the projects really range from multifamily housing, hotel, office, restaurant, bar, theater. We're kind of broad in that way. And we're also really broad in scale from 2 million square feet to 500 square feet. So our approach in the way we design is very macro to micro. So on the macro side, we're really involved with the city in creating policies specifically to incentivize development in existing buildings. And adaptive reuse, and we're really involved in the community of downtown LA and LA. And then on the small scale, really being involved in human-centered design with Annie Chu, by the way, she's kind of our partner in that exploration, but really about placemaking and how a space feels, and part of that really comes in our custom furniture and lighting design as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. So for this discussion to work, I really am encouraging all of you as the speakers to sort of interrupt each other whenever you can. But for this, I'll get us started. And with regards to the stark contrast that this pandemic has demonstrated, it's really put into stark relief the social and racial inequities that we're facing as our communities, become more sort of divided by the quality of atmosphere each of our homes provide. And so for that, Yaku, I wonder, if you have a reaction to that, if you're learning something, an observation that you can share, especially as it will start to be, impact the design of multifamily from your point of view.
Yeah, thanks. One thing that's I guess current in our discussions right now with doing some affordable housing in San Francisco is this idea of common spaces or shared spaces or amenity spaces outside of the units, which we tend to see in our market rate housing. We're often putting in business centers, we're putting in teen lounges, we're putting in a lot of these amenities, which are, you see everywhere in the market rate developments, and especially in the luxury developments, which we work on as well. And we're trying to bring some of those lessons learned into our affordable housing, because we're seeing now that in this time where we're all in our homes, which are often too small with kids running around and screaming, that it's, we're seeing huge inequities in terms of people being able to find good spaces to work from home if they're able to work from home, and that ability to collaborate and, sort of get communal spaces that are outside of their spaces, and being able to work with their neighbors and being able to conduct work in an efficient manner.
Thank you, Yaku. And David, what about you? Are you observing any? You've been in housing for so long. What are you learning in these last several months?
Well, I'm just going to keep pitching this idea. We have a thing here where the affordable housing industry has basically abandoned private open space. And anybody, it's great to have these shared spaces and amenity spaces, but pretty much, at least I am terrified of going into an enclosed room with a bunch of people right now, even if they have masks on. I'm just not doing it. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that we have, with the kind of misguided idea of saving money or sacrificing, the whipping boy of budgets is the balcony. And so we have been forbidden to provide any kind of private open space, which I think is a huge, originally I thought, well, this is just not a good idea. And then I thought, well, but it's actually an equity divider, because as Eskew knows, the market rate developers love private open space because they can rent it. And then the nonprofits are, oh gosh, I have to talk to the person with the barbecue. and tell them they can't have it. It's just it might fall off and kill somebody. It costs $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever it costs. So let's just eliminate it. But then the final thing is when COVID hit, and I was thinking all these people who are in these units with no place where they can go that isn't shared with their cohort. And so, in general, I think that that's a little short term, but something that I would like to keep pitching. So that's one of the things. The other thing on a planning level, and I'm sure LA is doing this, is we've had a tremendous, our local transit agency has had a huge opportunity to extend protected bike lanes because people who drive around and complain about them are all sitting at home or, gone to their second vacation home or whatever they do. And then they've also converted 35 miles of streets, one of which is in front of my little house in the Mission, to slow streets so people can walk and jog. And they did it without any kind of hearing or EIR process. They just went out and did it, 35 miles. So this is a fantastic opportunity we had here, and one that I hope we retain afterwards, that we just kind of go, hey, that was a great idea. Let's just make those little signs that say restricted access, 15 miles an hour, watch for pedestrians and runners. Just make that permanent.
Excellent.
Can I just pop in something? David, I would love to talk more about balconies because I see them being eliminated in market rate as well. But the interventions that have had so many positive side effects. In the city of Orange, in Orange County, California, there's a circle of downtown Orange that shows up in movies all the time. It's very often filmed. They closed the street that leads into it, a block north and a block south, so all the restaurants that are located there just took over the street. And it's fantastic, right? And people are walking, there's strollers and all this kind of stuff. And the idea of us romancing that kind of interface between the public and the private is something that I do think will stick with us. It's gonna whet our appetites for some of that to remain. So I think that's something that's gonna be sticky. A little off topic, but what you said reminded me of it. Yes, right? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. So Julie, David mentions private open space. What are some of the features that you're looking at, and what are your observations, especially with social equity in mind? On if we're contained to our home, but your home isn't healthy, then what?
Well, then what is the recognition that there's a housing crisis happened before COVID. And what was being set in motion then was to me, an agenda of expediency. So what was happening was that all the things that matter that you mentioned in your little preamble to this session of, light, air, private open space, public open space, they're sacrificed to get it done cheaper and faster. And there's nothing wrong with better means of production, and there's nothing wrong with doing it faster. But we're actually trying to save money in the hardest places that hit people in the long term. We should be focusing on saving money on the dumb rules that need to change. And I know a lot of you are working on that. We've got to get rid of the dumb interagency inconsistencies. Yeah, I'm getting some thumbs up there. I'm sure there's some in the crowd who have the same reaction as David. That's where we should be focusing, and we should not give up on the quality of life for the people living there. That was what put this whole decentralization of affordable housing into a better place. It made it an infill project and a neighborhood-based project, not a project. And we're going back to where we started. It's stupid.
As shades of HUD in the 70s, where balconies were an unjustifiable amenity, right?
Yeah, I think also, just to tag on to that, I think part of that is also pointing out another inequity in affordable housing as well as storage. We often don't provide enough storage in these units. And so in market rate, storage becomes a big thing. We often have storage lockers in basements, but in the affordable housing, it gets value engineered out. We end up with these tiny 2-foot closets. There's no common storage. There's tiny bedroom storage. So then the balconies become the extra storage. And so people start to put their bikes and their extra food storage out on the balconies. It becomes clutter, and I think that's where we get the pushback on the open space. So I think if we start to solve some of the inequities in storage that we see in low-income housing, and we start to provide people with the ability to buy in larger bulk, which helps reduce their overhead costs, allows them to make less trips to the grocery stores, which are often further away from a lot of these low-income developments. I think a lot of that all ties into the fact that then it becomes easier to argue for the balconies and the private open space. And then people start to be able to use those amenities as they were meant to be used, instead of as auxiliary spaces for their storage inequities.
Thank you. Karin, so before we go to Daniel, I want to go to Karin real quick, get your comments on this.
I think the other thing, in addition to all of that, are the way we look at unit types, because right now all the unit types that we're designing are still really kind of based on an idea of a nuclear family, or, you know, the whole DINK thing, which I don't even know if that is a saying anymore, but the double income, no kids, urban professional. And, you know, we really need to like stop thinking that there's like crazy solutions out there, that they're just normal solutions, because there's so few of us that are actually a nuclear family, or, you know, two urban professionals. There's so many other types, and how to create affordability in living by creating new unit types and really making that more of the norm.
Thank you. So Daniel, what are your comments on that? And how do we make these projects, you know, pencil out, so to speak, because, you know, we need these amenities for our housing?
Yeah, you know, it's, I want to riff on something Karin just said, because, Will, we were talking about this earlier. I'm very sensitized to this. I just looked at a site yesterday in LA on a busy corridor, commercial all around it, everything. And the underlying zoning was R4, which would allow me 109 units per acre. The people I was looking for were interested in doing micro units. You know, they're already doing them in LA. Not a lot of people are, but these guys are. And we looked at the site and said, oh, this is going well. So we did a property search, and it turns out it's governed by a specific plan that reduces R4 density to R1, essentially making the only thing viable on the site is large for sale condos. And I was so frustrated because I was preparing for this talk, and those of us who've been in the micro space are trying to lead that, went through, Karin, what was it, 7 years ago? LA started to adapt their rules to allow a unit of less than 450 square feet, or whatever it was. So that needle has been progressively moving, but the solution also includes all types of dwelling spaces for all types of people at all types of life stages. And so I'm seeing us thinking inclusively, while we each have a nuanced sort of niche of the market that we're working in. And we create possibilities by giving people permission to think differently. That's, I think, perhaps our most powerful role as architects.
Excellent. You know, Yaku, what are you thinking with regards to the responsibility of the building versus the neighborhood? And, you know, how do we integrate some of these amenities into the adjacent neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, I think David touched on this a little bit with the outdoor open space, but I think turning buildings inside out is a big component, you know, in terms of providing stoops, providing sort of that interaction between housing and the neighborhood, providing that interconnectedness. I think one of the things that, you know, probably leads to a lot of the sort of negative stereotypes and prejudices that we see, you know, that really coming to light is this idea of separation and, you know, sort of disconnecting people from the community. And I think the more we start to, you know, turn these buildings inside out, having this public-private interaction, sort of getting back to this model of shared neighborhoods, shared spaces, shared open spaces, you know, community spaces, we start to get that community energy and that bonding and that sense of respect and sense of, you know, working together that I think we're lacking right now. I think that there's this push to everyone find your own defensible space and stay in it and stay away from other people. And I realize that we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, so that's pretty important. But I think, you know, also tagging on to the idea of these closed public streets that become neighborhood spaces to hang out safely. I think Also, again, just going back to the inequities, making sure that those spaces are put in a variety of different neighborhoods and not just on the nice restaurant strips. And I think, there's sort of an idealized sense of, in San Francisco, Valencia Street, which is this great neighborhood for restaurants and bars and outdoor activity. That would be wonderful to see it as a pedestrian boulevard where you get lots of families outside and hanging out, and making sure that we also put that into the neighborhoods where we don't have the luxury of fine dining establishments, but hopefully that becomes a new way to provide that energy and that neighborhood connectivity in some of those other areas.
Thank you. David, I saw the thumbs up, so sort of elaborate.
Well, we have opened, I guess, from the anti-car viewpoint, opened Valencia Street. It's really great. But one thing I would say is that it's really important to ask the neighborhood. You might, it has to kind of be their idea, or they might reject it as, sort of an imperialistic elite coming in there and, closing their street, which they really are attached to. One thing was really interesting. I visited Bronzeville in the Bronx, which is like this very, we get off the subway and I go, wow, is this neighborhood safe? And I go, yeah, no, we haven't had any sniper attacks this year. And I went, this year, And anyway, but so what they did is they hadn't done any bike infrastructure out there. And they had this community meeting, and all these people showed up, people of color, and they went, why don't we have bike infrastructure? And, the city went, but, you're poor people of color, you don't want bike lanes, right? And they went, yes, we do. So I think it's really important to listen to people always first.
Thank you. Julie, what are some of these ideas you have? I feel like you may have an approach that will benefit us all from listening to.
I'm not going to go into the stupid rules rant. I'll leave that to others in our office who are working with the city to try and change them. But I will talk about a sort of a concept we've been calling sticky spaces for a while, or sticky space thinking, is that when you make something for the people who will inhabit the site, you're also making something for the neighborhood. So everything has a give back as a take in, and how to construct that, which is a different mindset from saying, here I have the right to build this much, how can I build it the best for the people inside? And it's not the old context matching shit. It's really about the idea of thinking about the cultural setting that you're in and how you can do that. So it's just, I would say we've got to just keep thinking the right way about this and not get distracted by, I think it was Karin said, by stuff that's the distraction of the times shouldn't change the basic principles, essentially, is what I would say. And if you keep your eye on that ball, then we'll be doing the most we can for the people we serve.
Excellent point. Daniel, can you elaborate a little bit on that as well?
Yeah. My brain was drifting off in a slightly different direction. I'm sure you're surprised by that by now. But I agree with the fundamentals. We have been renewed focus on well-being and health, in all the sort of different areas of our life. And Yaki was talking about public space, the accessibility to public space. Look, it's almost a given that the preponderance of very low income households have children, and that's very common. And they need a place for them to play, for example, and that's not particularly new, right? And probably all of us had that experience growing up. You had a very natural, safe place to go and play with your friends, and so on. And searching for that and how to incorporate that in a more, the irony comes is that in a less dense neighborhood, you're able to accomplish that theoretically better than in the urban context. So the two ends of the spectrum have very different challenges in terms of finding the accessibility to those spaces where people can have that unfettered childhood experience. And it was a little off from what Julie said, but that's what it made me think about.
I'd like to add to that. So one thing we've been working on the last few months are these kind of design charrettes of the, the post-pandemic thing, and at first there were all the conversations of, oh, it should all be about, what we're going through now. And I'm like, no, like Julie was talking about, no, it's really like, so in all the themes, we did a workplace one, we did a multifamily one, which I'm going to share some of that later. And we did like how to reuse commercial spaces in buildings. But the themes were all exactly the same. And they're all things we've been working on. It's just that there's this new sense of urgency, so again, this human-centered design, but with that is, we have to have that balance of social spaces and private spaces, that safe shelter. Obviously that's a key. The connection to nature. I mean, I think that's become really apparent and a clear lack of equity with that one. Obviously the mental and physical well-being, but also flexibility and adaptability of not just spaces, but buildings, the ability to easily transform things based on different needs. And then the other thing that we already started to talk about was more about blended uses. So it's not just mixed use housing where, there's private, there's the building only amenities, that there's now things, and I'm going to show an example of this later too, of really blending the uses, say on the ground floor of a downtown high rise with the public spaces. And then the other thing that was really consistent through all of our stuff was we really got to be thinking about the economic context of all of these things. And, one avenue is to deal with changing policy, but another avenue is how do we change our designs, the things that we as architects have control over. Well, we try to have control over, working with our clients to provide creative ways to have more affordable options across the board.
You do understand, right? That context is also circumscribed by the rules of the funding agencies, which require things to be done in very consistent ways. So we can play with the outside 5 foot of the design of the building, but there's very little room to maneuver within a unit to explore different ways that people might live better together.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how can we change, how can we go through developers to change, or to have the lenders kind of open up their viewpoints?
Yaku, are you experiencing that as well with your capital stack having conflicting guidelines?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one opportunity is potentially in, some competitively bid out projects where developers are competing against other developers for sites, and trying to incorporate some of these different strategies into those designs as a part of the narrative or part of the benefit of picking this particular group for it. And so we try and, convince them that it's worth taking these risks for things that may cost a little bit more upfront, but you bake it into the project early on as part of the winning strategy for them to potentially win this project and then move forward with the funding. So I think trying to get in early, with those discussions so that the funding is put in there early on.
So, I don't know if people are familiar with I was in Sydney on a Spur city visit, and there they do housing with developer architect design build teams. They have competitions, and then they select the conceptual phase, and then they continue to work, the planning department, the neighborhood, and the developers work together to realize the scheme that's won, which is, I don't know if you've seen that incredible building down there that's all covered in green, and it has the heliostat shooting light into the underground mall, Jean Nouvel building. That was because it won the competition. And, so it's a really interesting, but not perfect, but really interesting way to realize the really ambitious designs.
Thank you.
Julie might disagree with that. I don't know.
No, I want to follow on the thread of that, Will, if I might, is that
yes.
David has a passion about the open space, and I have one about for the wonderful, great work that the not-for-profit developers are doing. It is such a teeny, tiny drop in the bucket. And when we stare down the barrel of needing 500,000 housing units in California in 8 years, if we don't find ways to empower the market rate developers to produce attainable housing, it will never, ever happen. And so that's a policy thing, Julie. That's just straight out a policy issue. But I see people coming into that space. And David, this is where it gets to be a little tense, because we have spent so much time in the last year in the drive to value, as I like to say, and learning from the offsite fabrication world, how to apply that to stick and not waste anything. It's bringing like a Quaker mentality to producing the buildings. Don't do things that require dumb structural solutions that add $5 a square foot, for example, and things like that. And my favorite examples of this are people who are either doing a pared down yet sensibly amenitized neighborhood that just costs less to build. Number one, they go to communities that want it. Number two, they're all driven to anything that doesn't include building bedrooms for cars. And number three, they approach the stick built as if it was a fabricated project, and you don't want to waste anything. By doing that, they're able to deliver housing that's non-subsidized and rents for approximately 25 to 30% below market. And people are lined up around the block when they open.
Where is this happening? Because the land costs in LA don't seem to support that theory. I would
my superstar, yeah, Julie, I agree, and it's a little bit as contextual. My superstar developer doing this happens to be in Phoenix, and so they're on their fourth or fifth property that's doing it, and I'm just
so the issue is where in LA and San Francisco and other big cities where land prices is really driving it. And frankly, the land prices, so we're talking about affordability for those in most need. That's kind of the general construct. But let's talk about, I mean, homelessness is just a symptom of a bigger systematic problem, all the way up the chain of choices. So if we're talking about the pandemic and the protests revealing everything, it basically says that access to housing is a basic need at different income levels. And it's not just the bottom of the market, which the not-for-profit do, but there's people who are trying to sort of stabilize lives at all different things, and there's no support system. And we've always believed that the not-for-profit sector, well, it was a big step, but the not-for-profit sector needed subsidizing to be able to do what it did. And the tax credit thing happened, and cities started to contribute money for land. Frankly, those kind of incentives are needed for any kind of affordable, in the general sense, not in the specific deed-restricted sense, housing in LA. And I think we just got to come to grips with this is not a market. I disagree with you, Dan. I don't think this is a marketplace solution that will come because housing is a little bit cheaper. The land itself, will not let it happen, the cost of that land.
So, speculating about that, we're seeing a lot of flight from the dense areas because of the high costs. And, I think maybe the advocates for density, density is wonderful, but is it going to be as, from a carbon viewpoint, as compelling when people are not hauling their bodies to work as much? I think that there is a big argument for this enormous land resource we have, which could reduce the price per unit. And that is all this single family zone, which is 80% of the land in California is zoned for single family. The great regulatory capture of the boomer generation, where they basically, got theirs and don't allow anybody else to have anything.
Yeah, why should we?
Yeah, exactly. The crabby boomers. Yes.
Igma-fu, if you haven't heard that term before.
Well, I'm a crabby boomer for sure, or curmudgeon. But, so there's a huge opportunity there. And, I have a guy who used to work for me whose specialty is adding, ADUs within rent-controlled apartment buildings. It turns out that, they're converting the garages into units, and it's become a huge business here because, the landlords, and it's got its dark side too, because they get to do a lot of work on a rent-controlled building, and they're kind of hoping somebody leaves so they can, re-rent it at market rate. But that's the dark side. But the good side is they're adding a lot of housing, and that's a huge resource. And taking your single-family neighborhood and doing what Seattle's done and allowing the six-pack, as they call it. You just fit the form of the largest single-family house, and then you can put 6 tiny townhouses on it. That's added a huge amount of housing. So I think those are things that could cause a more dispersion and less of this super premium to live right downtown.
David, I have something I hope you will welcome. and we do a lot of for sale housing for national builders, names you'd recognize. There's not one of them for whom right now we are not putting ADUs in every new house that's constructed. And the whole point of that is that you get this hybrid of homeownership and rental opportunity, and it can work as a multi-gen situation, or it can simply, by supporting the bottom line of the person who owns the property, allow them to rent something that's affordable. And by definition, ADUs are smaller, so they tend to be more attainable. But we're seeing that just sweeping. And I want to, applaud Scott Wiener for pushing that relentlessly in the legislature to essentially, forgive me for being controversial, but outlaw single-family zoning in California.
So,
Scott is my hero.
So, Karin, with your approach, especially with dense multi-urban family, what are some of the how are you reimagining some of the solutions?
Let's see. So maybe this is a good time to bring up I'm going to bring up my little charrette thingy. Like I was saying before, we were really looking at all the various scales. Oops, let's see here. And I kind of talked about the things that were coming through in all of these themes. We've already, I think the whole outdoor space, this audience definitely knows the importance of that. One thing we explored, which might be considered a little radical, and Julie, honestly, I didn't even think about some lender requirements, which is a really, really good point on some of these ideas. So to figure out how to kind of get past that. But if we kind of deconstruct what might be considered the traditional apartment building, one idea, which is about creating diversity of choice based on cost and the family type and all that kind of stuff. So this idea is basically saying, all right, what if you had a building where the front of the building had, relatively traditional units. So living, dining, kitchen as a space, and then maybe a bedroom or two. But then the back of the building is basically a series of rooms. So maybe they're 10 by 10 or 12 by 12. They're small. They can be a sleeping space. They could be a workspace. They could be a TV room, whatever. So it allows the flexibility and also flexibility in time and adaptability. So say the pink, for example, is like a multi-generational unit. Maybe there's like the main adult and their young child, maybe it's a single parent, whatever, say living here, but the shared space of the living, dining, kitchen is also shared with maybe their parents. So there's a grandparent element, and maybe their sleeping TV room or something is back here, including a small outdoor space and a bathroom. Maybe there's an adult child in the situation, or a cousin or something else that kind of lives on the property, has a smaller piece, but the kind of kitchen, living, dining is over here. And the separation is not necessarily a bad thing, because it also increases, the need for physical activity, the need for, or the idea of getting outdoors. And of course, all these spaces would have outdoor spaces, but, it allows this flexibility. Another one, say the blue is showing like a roommate situation. So maybe there's, so 150 square feet, you could have a little bedroom and a bathroom where one of the roommates sleeps over here and has their own private space, their getaway space. But then in the main living space, they can all be together. And then, for the yellow, which could be more of like just a single adult, where it could be very affordable. They have, basically a micro loft kind of scenario. Oops. And so, yeah, I guess we have to figure out, code-wise, I think this is doable. From a lender perspective, maybe it's a little more challenging. And then the unit type thing, that's what's going on here. So the unit type, that's just showing that. If we even just simply took your standard apartment, in your standard apartment building, and we added a few feet to each side of the master suite or whatever, say you have a 2-bedroom master suite, we need these private spaces. So even if it's within the master suite, having a space for work, that is adaptable and flexible, or a nursery, or, the other side, it could be 2 bedrooms, it could be a bedroom with a workspace, providing that flexibility. Whoops, I'm having problems with the other unit type that, so whether it's multi-generational or two families with young kids. You know, we've found that if they can live together and kind of have their private space, but also support each other. So maybe downstairs in this scenario, there's a corridor just on the every other floor type of unit. So maybe downstairs, family one lives over here and they have 2 bedrooms and a bath, and family 2, this is their private space. And then upstairs, they have a shared living, dining, kitchen. This can really help with affordability as well as a smaller sense of community and support to each other. And then just, you know, this is one unit we were looking at with some of the existing buildings where there's a real lack of light and ventilation. So maybe there's, you know, a bunch of windows on one side, but really doing more of this kind of pod type of roommate situation. So you could get 6, maybe even 8 adults in a 1,600 square foot unit, you know, so maybe these are pods that at night you sleep, and potentially even during the day you have this kind of flip down desk, so you could still have your totally private space. Maybe there's some traditional bedrooms and that kind of thing. So those are like unit type. There's a million different unit type ideas, right, that we can come up with, but how do we show this to our developers and start the conversation? The next area we looked at was common areas. And so one thing we thought that was really lacking was this more holistic approach to common areas. So, you know, this is a building that we're working on. It's under construction. The units are about 530 square feet each. There's a little bit of a range, but they're you know, small-ish. So, you know, all these urban projects that we're working on, you know, you try to max out the roof. So that is one sense of community because it's about the inhabitants of the building. But then creating maybe these kind of smaller little porch shared areas, maybe it's every floor, maybe it's every 3 floors, to create a different scale of community. So maybe it's that floor, you know, or also if you're in a really big building, it's kind of a long way to go to the roof or whatever. And then the ground floor, like really rethinking the ground floor. So many ground floor retail spaces, commercial spaces are empty and have been struggling before the pandemic. And now, especially downtown, is just so screwed. It's in really, really bad shape. And so how to, oops, I keep using the wrong thing. Okay, so I'll go into that in a minute. So with the roof, I think our one big takeaway is all these rooftops, there's so many amazing amenities in these, especially for-profit, like you're saying, definitely for the for-profit market rate housing. But there still is not a lot of green space. It's hardscape. It feels like plazas. It doesn't feel like a park. We really need to re-emphasize the green. Spend the money on the green. And, you know, a really easy way to bring that in is, you know, definitely this whole new push and drive towards urban farming and growing your own. And that also brings such a sense of a shared experience and group interaction. And you can have like a really great kitchen, cooking classes or whatever, you know, there's all sorts of ideas there of how you can kind of bring that in. And then our other big takeaway was work pods. So, you know, especially if a building is filled with micro units and you don't have a place to get away to go work, to have these little work pods kind of sprinkled throughout the building. You know, maybe there's some on the roof, maybe there's one on the common floor, maybe there's one, some in the ground floor, but a place to get away, to go work and have focused and private space. A good place for a video call, you have sound enclosure, maybe not all of them are enclosed, but these kind of work pod ideas. The shared porch, this is the idea that's maybe every floor or every few floors, just carving out a little space that's just a little respite space to go to. Again, if you're in a micro loft, you know, especially if you're sharing it with a partner, you got to get out, you know, or so this one, this is an existing building. We're even more challenged with outdoor space, but just removing windows, having an open air but enclosed space can really go a long way. And you know, we threw another work pod in here too. There's no reason to not have a work pod right there. And then the ground floor, the idea is, again, instead of having, you know, 4 or 8 or whatever retail spaces, that it's really more of this kind of like general store and restaurant bar integrated blended use kind of scenarios. So it's really, so say for example, there's, you know, a little bit more of a traditional restaurant bar, but it's kind of blended into kind of a grocer element. And then, you know, that the mail room isn't just this back of house thing anymore, that it really becomes part of the front of house experience. You know, there's going to be a huge need for refrigerated boxes and larger parcel rooms and delivery needs, and making that more of like almost integrating it with a commerce element. You know, there could be a retail pop-up or small retail there, maybe another bar, maybe there's the yellow could be some workspaces that could be shared, but all of those spaces or most of those spaces could invite the public, whether it's even a, you know, destination kind of public, but definitely the community, the neighborhood around, being like, oh, I'm going to go hang out there. There's the grocer, there's the bar. And then, so with these common spaces, again, the idea is different scales of community and interaction. And then the last scale that we looked at was really inside the unit. So this is taking that 530 square foot unit and saying, okay, how would we redesign that today? And some of the things that we're lacking, right? So I think, you know, the indoor-outdoor space is a big one. And especially in existing buildings, it's really hard to have that private space, but you know, it's been done. There's no reason we can't do it, except in historic buildings, we can't do it. But just, you know, remove the window and have this cool little porch, you know, that's enclosed but open air, and make sure that it's really interconnected with the rest of the unit, so that there's a blend there. And then workspaces. So this is showing, well, what if you had a kitchen and during the day you could almost close this off? It could be glass, it could be just a curtain, but it provides a space, especially if you have two people living in this small apartment. One could be in this more sound isolated space at the window, and maybe the other has like a flip down desk or not. And then the other idea is this entry vestibule. Instead of having just a door on the hallway and it's this monotonous hallway, that instead, the idea is you make it a functional space. So you have a deep closet for the bikes and the skateboards and the luggage, or, you know, your memorabilia storage or whatever. It also creates like a shoe cubby, especially in urban living, pre or post pandemic, just like that element of cleanliness we're trying to get back to. And then a space to kind of create a sense of personality, instead of just having these monotonous corridors that don't have any connection to the people that live beyond the door, that this is kind of like a transition space, that it belongs to the person in that unit, but it's also connected to the passerby in the corridor. And then this just kind of shows that unit of maybe during the day that little outdoor space is kind of open and connected. Maybe, you know, these two people are working in their various locations, and then maybe it transitions at night.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's a lot of information. I'm going to invite Julie, Yaku, and David to reflect on that and to share some comments. And then Daniel, we're going to, you know, so much of what Karin is offering is on the site solution. And do you have some ideas at the neighborhood level?
Yeah, sorry, I had to reach for mute. So you want them are going to react, and then I'll show that. I think that would be great.
Yeah. So Daniel's about to share some of his ideas that sort of, you know, reflect on the neighborhood, but Yaku and Julie and David, you know, with what Karin has shared, if you have any comments or.
I think that this is one series of great ideas that I've seen come and go over the years, and I'm glad that you're investigating them again and putting them into a form that's so shareable. But the real fundamental systematic issue is that we're not building for housing resiliency. So let's say 5 years from now, all of those people, and I've got kids in this group, who now want to have somewhere where they can raise kids, but they don't really want to leave town. So you'll find that the demographic shift in the real estate market will mean that they want a different kind of unit in 5 years. But we don't build housing in a way that's easily transformable from one kind of unit to another. So we basically make our buildings redundant within 10 to 15 years. So if construction type was required to be different and code was changed so that if you built 2-bedroom units, for example, you could change them to 1-bedroom units and you wouldn't get hit with a whole process to do that, that's a good thing. At the moment, we confine a building to how it was built at the time it was built, and make it very difficult to change it over the lifetime of a building. So to me, that's a fundamental shift in what cities would be looking, how they would be entitling projects that would allow for the kind of flexibility and change and adaptability that's built into what you're talking about, Karin.
Thank you, Julie. David, Yaku, do you have any remarks?
Well, I'm going to say that it's very expensive to build housing, market rate housing, and one of the things that's really difficult is that we've come to rely on basically taxing market rate to provide special needs housing, and I think that that's resulted in a burden, a huge burden on new market rate housing. This is not going to make me popular with my affordable housing friends. And it's really I've
called them already.
Yeah, it's really tragic that we have that we can't build for the middle class without subsidy, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. And inclusionary fees are one of them. This intense, lengthy regulatory maze we have to go through. We're working in Nashville now, and you have like one meeting, and they're under construction in 6 months. It would take us 5 years to
Jealous.
do. Yeah, and it doesn't, obviously the developers get away with stuff that, maybe be better if it was better if we, tortured them for years, but they do provide enough housing for people, and those markets are less expensive. And I think that, cities are going to have to get competitive on this stuff because, and we had a principal move to Birmingham, Alabama, and because she had a rent-controlled apartment in San Francisco, studio, they had their second kid, and they couldn't take it anymore. And, they bought a 4-bedroom house for $200,000 and they telecommute everywhere. So it's very, very interesting. I think we're going to have to really become competitive in urban areas and not be pursuing perfection.
So we have about 10 minutes before we start a Q&A with the audience. I'm encouraging everyone to type your question into the chat or to use the raise your hand feature under the participant box. But Daniel, share some of your ideas on at the neighborhood level, what we're looking at.
Sure. One moment. Too many clicks to do it, Karin. I'm having sympathy for you now. So now for something completely different from Karin. First I have to say, love that it's adaptive reuse because your bathrooms don't have to be ADA accessible. That made that very sexy to me. And working at that scale where every inch counts is really interesting. This kind of takes scale in the other direction. However, this is designed as a for sale, entry-level for sale community. It's sort of hypothetical, though, biaxial symmetry, for example. How often do you get to do that? Not very. But my point that I want to make, I'll confess, I happen to live in a house. The underlying zoning is 8 units per acre, I think, something around that. So people who do single family have been pushing to get more single family detached homes because there's still a premium. I mean, 65% of everybody lives in a ownership condition in the United States. 35% rent, 65% own. So that's a lot of people. And we wanted to look at how you can get a neighborhood that you can absolutely start out in. And so what we've done is a variety of different projects. We like cluster homes because the front doors are on paseos or green spaces and the garages are clustered in one place. We can't completely get rid of them, but this cluster up here is our tiniest group. Those are essentially apartment-sized single-family houses with limited parking. Planned to go in a neighborhood that has all these different sort of products in it. We use tiny footprints, go 3 stories because you can still do 3 stories in type 5 without the additional OSHA, thank you, Julie, burden of going to a 4-story building. Plus, you don't need elevators, although we found ways around that too. But what happens is you're able to aggregate these open spaces. You're largely taking them out of backyards, except for teeny yards. And most of these have puppy yards, if you've heard that term. So mostly different levels of dense single family, and just these cruciform buildings are starter townhomes. Same thing, they have limited parking, very small space, super simple, design that would lend itself to offsite fabrication really easily. And the point is this, is that neighborhood, it looks like this. And what happens is that people's front doors, they're interacting constantly. It's like having little pods of living, and then they can celebrate the open spaces. So they are clearly shared open space. Because this is hypothetical, it's not designed with a over-the-top club room or anything like that. But one of my favorite products here is this one. It's the cluster. It's a teeny footprint. On that entry level, you have a 1-car garage and a 3-story house that's under 1,000 square feet. So the idea is, and again, Julie, if we can find a place where the dirt is not extraordinarily expensive, and those places right now on our boards are secondary and tertiary LA border town cities. I'm thinking Alhambra, La Habra, Santa Fe Springs, Whittier, Southgate, right? And places like that where you can still do this and you're not too far. David can't solve for the drivability problem. I just kind of put that under the rug because there's some things can't be solved at the same time, it seems like. But this allows someone to get into a starter home for under $300,000. If you happen to be in a remote area, think Palmdale or El Cajon or places like that, you can get into it for under 200,000, right? So that almost works for somebody, combined household making 75,000 a year. So that is a missing, missing middle. We didn't coin that term, but really agree. So this is a way to do that. Plus, give those individuals the opportunity to harvest equity when they move from these places. So it just keeps rotating and filling with different people. You could start in a town, move to a single family detached. It's that sort of idea because you're already grown to know the people in your neighborhood. Anyway, I got to stop, Will, but that's basically how we're working on the for sale, smaller scale, to attack the same thing a little bit up from the subsidized affordable, but still with the intention of first-time home buyers. They actually have there's a product for them in California without leaving the state.
Thank you, Daniel. I feel like some of this really does depend on new construction, but I'm looking at a world in my future where I feel adaptive reuse and retrofitting is much more sensible from a resource management point of view. Yaku and David, we're going to start questions, but I wanted to give you a chance to Yaku, especially sort of comment on what you're listening to here.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I would like to mention is just the idea of the workforce housing, the sort of mid-level housing, which I think is probably the hardest to build, and I think it'll be interesting to see if these ADUs start to have an impact on that. But I think that there's going to be much more that's needed. I think it's really easy to get or not easy, but it's, we're sort of structured in a way that we can get the tax credits for doing the 100% affordable, which deals with a certain population. We're able to, the dollar speaks in terms of doing the high-end housing, but there's that left out middle part, which is really hard to fund. And in San Francisco, we incentivize developers to include those in mixed income developments, but it's actually, we're sort of seeing a pushback from that because you can take the money that would be attributed to building those middle income units in that housing and take it out and put it on a separate site, and that you can get state and federal funding to actually increase the size of that and house more people, but you're also changing the income level of those potential units. And so we're missing that whole middle gap, I think, of housing. And I think that's really important in an urban environment where we're seeing, especially the workforce, starting to move further and further out. They're the ones who are taking on the bigger commutes. And then those with the money are able to, buy the few single family houses left here. I also think that it'll be interesting to see just how many of the ADUs that are getting built are actually getting rented out to, sort of middle income individuals or families or couples, as opposed to just becoming additional living spaces for some of these wealthier individuals, or as a way of sort of expanding their houses in an easy way. So I think it would be great to see some of the ideas that Daniel's putting together, come into urban environments where we can potentially get more density, and provide entry-level purchasing opportunities for a lot of people that haven't, had the generational inequalities of wealth and not being able to build up any kind of family wealth because you can't have ownership in dense urban environments because there's nothing that's available for purchasing that's, of that scale as a starter home.
Thank you. I feel like there's a thread here, and one of those threads between what David said and is the emphasis on reprogramming single family. But I would like to maybe add to this the emphasis on reprogramming our public right-of-ways. We have over 4,000 miles of streets here in Los Angeles. That's an incredible amount of land that we could reclaim and put towards shelter. So it's 9 o'clock in the morning. We're going to go to Q&A with the audience, and we'll do that. And then we'll come back and we'll do final remarks. And ideally, we'll get out of here at 9:30 so we can all begin our job. So with that, Stephanie Reich, you're on the line. You have an interesting question here. Can you unmute yourself and share that with everyone?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for, thank you, Will, for a great panel. It's good to see you. I think I know most of you, David and Yaku. I'm not sure we know each other yet. So I wanted to thank you. This is a great thought-provoking presentation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Reich. I work with the City of Santa Monica, helping to manage the design review and preservation systems. I've now served 4 cities in a similar capacity. And I know that city rules are frustrating. They frustrate me every day. And we are working very hard to make it easier to build housing. I typed this into the chat, but I want to make sure that I say this to everyone. There are lots and lots of rules that have been created by lots and lots of public meetings that intentionally, this is my view, not Santa Monica's view, that intentionally make it difficult to build things. And it's going to take a while for all of us working together to unravel that. It's frustrating for us, as frustrating for us as it is for you. So we are your partners. So that's I'm going to get off my soapbox, and now I'm going to ask a question. In Santa Monica and in all the other cities I've served, we've seen a lot of different housing types that are, sometimes they're under the radar. I think Yaku was mentioning that existing buildings are being renovated, or maybe it was David who said that, the dark side of housing, renovated, 3-bedroom units renovated so that 6 singles can live in there. You know, that's very difficult. You know, the city is trying to grapple with figuring that out. One of the things that I'm personally worried about is creating units for the long term that are not going to become the slums of tomorrow. We're very focused on building more housing, building more density, and at the same time getting every cent out of the construction. So how are we building in a way that these buildings will last and provide a quality of life for the residents?
Thank you, Stephanie.
Can I share quickly one line? Hey, Steph, great question, thank you. And I'll just quickly say this line that I've heard before. One of the best ways to build affordable housing today is to have built Class A housing 25 years ago. So products we build new, and Julie, once the bloom is off the rose, it often moves their affordability a little bit so they're more attainable. So if we can be thoughtful about all the stuff that we've discussed today in building the new communities, when they eventually mature and move down the food chain from Class A to Class B or B minus, then they will continue to supply a very, very necessary component of the market. So that's my pitch for that.
Yeah, you know, I think that, not to sound like the libertarian here, but we need more of everything. And I think the hypothetical, what happens if this goes wrong, which my friends in, you know, the planning department, they're really nervous that, you know, something's going to be built that doesn't work. And we had a huge debate here when we moved our the size of our minimum unit in San Francisco down to 250 square foot. And there are all these people like, oh, this is going to be terrible. It's oppressive. And I'm like, well, you know, if somebody builds it and they can't rent it, is that such a bad thing? And then, you know, and so I'm just saying that I would like to see, and one of the great things about the pandemic is that there's been, and SB 35 and Scott Wiener, is we've got to sidetrack these hypothetical concerns, right? Because we're worried about the future. We don't know what the future is going to be. And really, put that planner in the middle of the street. And SB 35, we love SB 35. When we meet with our urban design advisory team and we go, thank you very much for your input. This is our design now. We're just going to build it. We don't have to go to the planning commission. So those are really good things. And I think there's a double-edged sword there. You could get some very bad buildings out of it, but maybe the city can absorb some bad buildings. So we shouldn't be so nervous about some experiment's going to go wrong.
I'm going to add the really prosaic one for those of you who are on the construction site in difficult times. I've said this for years that one of the ways to get the durability is to fight for quality on the building side, even when the rest of your team is tired and wants you to stop asking questions and stop saying that it's not built right or this should be done better, because it will. It's essentially a sustainable strategy, if anything, because the building will be more durable in the long term to serve its purpose. So all of you on site fighting for the good fight, give me a call if you need a cheerleader, because your owner said, don't fight this. We're in a hurry, that we're already behind schedule. You're doing the right thing.
Thank you, Julie. So Gio, you're on the line here. Can you sort of share your question?
Oh, sure, absolutely. My question is a question that I ask all the time. I really was following Karin's presentation very closely and some of the ideas that she had in terms of, better use of space, multi-use of the same space. These are very good ideas that actually have been happening in Europe for years. I mean, Europeans live in very, very tight spaces and they're able to make it work. And somehow in the American culture, especially in housing, it seems like funding agencies are constantly requiring more and more restrictions, more and more space. For example, county money that's received requires, more storage in bedrooms, and it makes buildings much larger, units much larger. My question is, how do we come together to convince the funding agencies to really think in a more unique way and collectively? Because if you have 5 or 6 funding agencies on the project, each one of them has their own requirements, and they really throw things off track, because now you're chasing basically, and you're not chasing, but you're following their requirements, and all these great ideas like the ones that Karin had, they're not possible. And so, my question to everybody is, how do we get together with not only the funding agencies, the builders, essentially the builders, the funding agencies, the seeding agencies, the architects and the developer need to work in a collaborative way. And right now, everybody seems to be in their own little silo. Everybody throws their own requirements, and the architects have to follow. We at a boat community have a developer, that also works with us, and they want to do the right thing. They want to build balconies. They want to build more open space. But now it's becoming more and more difficult because of cost. So cost containment has become a big deal, especially in our organization. And so those are huge questions. They're pretty general, but maybe somebody can jump in and say, how are you dealing with that? Because David mentioned Wiener and all the great things that he's doing up in San Francisco. It has to come from that. It has to come from the top, and then there has to be a mandate so that we can all have, can create better living for our communities. And right now, it seems like, as I said, we're all going in different directions.
I think this would be a good one to pass to Will, because it sounds like an awesome thing for the AIA to help corral us and to, do advocacy at that higher level. And again, since I'm doing, market rate housing, I'm not experiencing any of that of lender restrictions. But Will, maybe.
Well, so Julie made reference to Brian Lane. Brian Lane and I, as well as a few others, have been putting together this idea on looking at all the funding sources and all the guidelines that come hand in hand with those funding sources and finding a way to remove the inconsistencies or at least create some sort of hierarchy. And I also think flexibility is key here. However, Karin, I disagree a little because I do think lenders, the equity partners, the insurance companies, the pension plan providers, they all create these predicaments that really influence even market rate. And I think that if the architecture community could connect more deeply with the financial community and say, hey, look, all these restrictions you're putting on, all these market demands that you think are actually really undermining some of your other missions and purposes. And so I welcome those conversations. I want to go to Ken Bernstein real quick, who has a really good question about the opportunity for adaptive reuse 2.0 citywide. So Ken, are you on the call?
I am. Good morning. Yeah, Ken Bernstein representing LA City Planning, both our Urban Design Studio and Office of Historic Resources. It's great to see everyone. I do want to echo Stephanie's comments about what we hope is the productive role of planning departments and public agencies in creating quality housing. But I wanted just to hear the panel's thoughts in a little more detail on what you see as opportunities to convert what might be excess or underutilized office space post-COVID with what we might anticipate as a decline in demand for traditional commercial office space, to think about an adaptive reuse ordinance in LA's terms, kind of adaptive reuse 2.0. Think about what do we have to do to really produce new housing at scale in some of those commercial spaces, thinking through the zoning and building code and fire code obstacles. I know a number of you have been involved with past adaptive reuse efforts and would love to hear your thoughts on that topic.
Okay, so I have some, in fact, Ken, I owe you a meeting because we just finished a whole analysis of the new 2040 plan specific to the adaptive reuse side, which I'd like to tell everybody is amazing and super exciting. So if you don't know, the 2040 plan is supposed to be the new downtown zoning plan coming out in hopefully a year-ish. And within that, there's a very comprehensive adaptive reuse section. So it basically takes the old adaptive reuse ordinance and adds all sorts of additional developer incentives, which is fantastic. So for example, it allows the addition of a lot of floor area, anything basically within the building, if it's historic, but still a lot of new floor area, even if it's not historic, and allowing rooftop additions, primarily one addition, one floor. You could pretty much do you could do a lot on the roof with not being considered new floor area. So that also takes away, any change. It'd be all by right. So that is going to be fantastic. Now the AIA 2.0, the idea would be to take what they've already revised for downtown and make it citywide. So right now it says citywide, yeah, you can do that, but you have to do a ZAD, which is still adding a year and a half CEQA and all that other stuff. So if we can just take that language that they've done a great job of, and I'm happy to share the analysis that we did of what you can do with that to citywide, to me, that's the key.
Can I, and Karin, I know that you are like the empress of adaptive reuse. I completely get that. So many buildings you've touched downtown, it's fantastic, right? But we're doing something, we have a little project, it's not very big, but I think it's the tip of the spear is, I can't be too specific about it, but it's a very urban location on a transit stop that was overparked. So Ken, we are actually converting part of the parking structure right now to residential units because they don't need it for cars. So we're taking spaces that were built for cars and reconditioning them for people. And for Planning Commission, it has been on a tear on this issue for several years, right? Because there's so much stock of parking, especially in those big office buildings, that if you convert them to residential, you don't need all those parking spaces anymore. And the opportunities there are great. for this on the parking structures that have sufficient floor-to-floor heights. So it's starting to happen, and I would love to see a torrent of it happen, especially in LA.
So I'm going to ask a question back to Ken. So this sounds fantastic because you've basically dealt with the impediments in the planning department. How's the coordination with the building department? Because a lot of it is to get with the building code compliance with the opportunity created by the planning opportunity.
No, that's right. That's why I asked the question the way I did. I have to acknowledge the coordination has a ways to go on the code side. And I think I want to also just better understand what those impediments are and what some of the solutions are. We worked through that with the original adaptive reuse program for older and historic structures, but I think we have a different set of challenges with maybe newer commercial office buildings that may not have the ability to have natural ventilation, and I think there's a variety of challenges there. I'd love to hear more about in terms of what those code solutions are.
So, so there's maybe something to be learned through hotels. So we converted the standard, which was I can't remember what the actual. It was a headquarters for an oil company, and it was converted to a hotel. And its big problem was a 97-foot deep floor plate. So I know the issue you're talking about, but people haven't died in the hotel, put it that way. And so there is ways of getting ventilation that is suitable for people who are sleeping in the building and to get the fire code to work. But the way the code interprets stuff for permanent housing is different to what it interprets for hotels. But there may be something to learn from the different building type that you could take to the housing.
Thanks. That's great.
That's an excellent point. And Ken, thank you for your leadership with Los Angeles City Planning. You know, I'll go back to Yaku and David. I know San Francisco, you know, we have a lot to learn from them. You know, what are some of the strategies you're working on to overcome these obstacles?
Hold on, we have nothing to learn from San Francisco.
You know, San Francisco, I was at a presentation, and they ranked all the cities in the country on the amount of bureaucracy you had to go through to get a building permit. And they had analyzed 2,778 cities, and San Francisco was 2,777th. So I think you have nothing to learn from us on mitigating process. It's crazy, you know. It's and to that whole thing, we have a guy who's doing a mixed-use building. It's almost done, and he's got this nice floor of office space, which is going to be really valuable for some little tech startup. And he's like, "Oh my God, what do I do? How do I convert this to housing?" And you know, well, you know, in a year we can change your use permit.
So you know, we have about 15 more minutes for Q&A from the audience. So I encourage you all to share your question. I'm wondering if anyone has any sort of specifics on HVAC solutions. There seems to be a lot of stress right now on these. From Terrence Daniels. Terrence, are you on the line?
Am I on mute?
We can hear you. Welcome.
Okay, yeah. I actually am a designer, and I'm not from LA, so it's a different situation out here with housing. But I'm actually from Texas, so definitely different situations. But trying to find out, because most of the situations I've seen that you guys present are housing solutions that are based on, you know, unit based housing solutions. And when I was out there, I stayed for a little while in a really small, dingy kind of place that I rented for a while, and is actually destined for destruction in I heard from the residents in like less than 6 months. And I find out, you know, that I think that a lot of the places are being, I don't know if this is the general situation, but gentrification is kind of taking place in that they're taking out some of the older buildings so they can put nicer housing up or you know, what have you. But I think a lot of the reason that might be happening maybe because I see a lot of the videos online of all the modern houses that are the styles and things. And being a designer, you know, I can't help but kind of like look at that type of thing and see that, like, I'm agreeing with like Gio that in Europe, a lot of the time they have those situations and they're able to kind of like combine spaces and have very large open spaces, and it's not really a big deal. But here it's sort of more traditional and more of a kind of a traditional approach, I should just say, as a, you know, and but for the most part, it's modernization really hasn't taken hold in the area of, I guess, communal housing and that type of thing. And well, what I was really kind of wondering about was like these housing spaces that you're creating. I would think that wouldn't they be kind of like more accepted if they had a more of a like a modernistic or design feel, someplace that people feel like they are on par or in quality wise, you know, on par with some of the housing they're building out in the hills or whatever, which has like very little storage anyway. Yaku was talking about storage and how people are feeling cheated because they're running out of storage. But if you look at, you know, through some of these houses that they're creating, I mean, there's only like, aside from the garage unit, maybe there's only like a few little cabinets here and there. There's definitely space in the kitchen, but like a bookshelf and whatnot. But in terms of that, I'm wondering if, you know, the industry out there is embracing, I know a lot of the startups are doing prefabs, but I'm wondering if you guys are considering in your process the creation of prefab unit style of design process. And I was actually at another conference for urban air mobility, and also, you know, alternative forms of transport, in that the industry is trying to move forward a lot of times with these different technologies, smart technologies. I know they're trying to build a smart city somewhere, you know, some billionaires, you know, a couple of them are trying to build different smart cities. And so I think for the most part, with the way things are going now, people are feeling like there's a disparity, even regardless of race, that, you know, a lot of the tech billionaires or whoever are kind of like benefiting off their information and building these smart cities and whatnot. But I'm wondering how much of these different technologies you guys are willing to embrace in the idea of like a vertiport hotel, or a not hotel, but a, you know, they were talking about vertiports at this conference, and like the kind of combination of vertiports. I don't want to take up too much more time. I'm going to wrap it up, but these different technologies and how you can incorporate them into your design process. And how, I mean, I'm sure you only get asked, you know, once a millennium, how am I going to incorporate a parking garage on top of my house for urban air mobility?
Well,
so I guess that's all I have to say. And I also have a video I want to share in the chat, if you care to take a look at it, of something that I kind of put together as a non-nuclear example of what I was talking about. But anybody who wants to field the question can go, I guess.
Thank you, Terrence. So yeah, that was a lot to unpack. We might have to do an entirely new panel to just sort of address some of the questions you brought up with technology. I think because we're limited on time, I welcome any response to Terrence's remarks, but also we have a question from Ilaria, and maybe we'll go to Ilaria and then we'll come back for final remarks.
To unmute. Sorry, I was muted. Hi, Will. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess it's just a quick comment, and maybe picking on the hour-and-a-half conversation. I think a lot of it could be also addressed by thinking about lifestyle. I'm talking about Los Angeles and, you know, the idea of private spaces, my private garden, my security, everybody that is afraid of facing the street and opening up. And now we are talking about more community and opening towards the streets. And I think that may be also engaging the press and engaging a new lifestyle, promoting this connectivity rather than, you know, the single family home with the front lawn that nobody wants to sit on. So that's I think is someone else that really helps us, someone like Francis Henderson, right, that in DNA can really help us to bring to the idea of everybody of sharing and being more communal in the way we think of our public spaces and shareable front yards and sidewalks uses. And the other is natural ventilation. I think we need to do much better, stop sealing our buildings and putting air conditioning in a city like Los Angeles. And that's for us architects to really push away the lobby of the HVAC systems. And again, I want to be brief, but these were two thoughts that I really want to put out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. So let's answer some of those questions through your closing remarks, and we'll go to Yaku first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings up a lot of interesting things. I mean, I think the American ideal is actually counter to where we should be going in terms of this idea of, you know, we should all have our own houses out in the middle of the suburbs and we should all have our own offices in the middle of the tower. And, you know, sort of changing what it means to be successful in this country, you know, should probably be more about your place in community and your connection to community as opposed to your isolation, your self-created isolation. You know, the idea of driving from your individual home in your individual car to your individual office, and instead think about how we're all interacting together and seeing how that translates through architecture and the design and the projects that we do. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And David Baker.
Well, I'm one of these armchair epidemiologists, and they talk about in the medical industry how they've compressed 10 years of development of remote medicine in 3 months. And I'm hopeful. I think that our future is being propelled forward because one of the things, natural ventilation, you know, great idea. In cities, we have to stop driving as much and stop giving everybody cancer near roads before we can really open the windows, you know. So, and maybe that is something that will happen. Maybe this bit of less driving will continue on, and we can share public space, take some space away from cars, take some of the huge investment we put into cars and give that to people. And the other thing I would like to see is we're lucky enough to be involved in some experimental construction that's funded by really rich tech people. Really fun thing to do because, you know, we're taking, I think, 2 years off the city process. But I think it would be really great for there to be some actual experiments, the funded experiments around new housing, whether it's congregate living or, you know, having this place that's more of a giant co-housing, separate, super flexible space, which, you know, you take that to the banker and probably not going to go very far. We need somebody to write a big check. So I'm really hopeful for the experimentation that the pandemic has forced.
Thank you, David. And we'll go to Daniel and then Karen, sorry, and then Julie. So Daniel.
Wow, so much stuff. I know David has done offsite fabrication projects and I've worked on them as well. And the irony of them is in the places where the land is cheaper, they don't work because they're more expensive to build than stick. But in the highly impacted global neighborhoods, so if you look at some of the stuff Patrick Kennedy is doing in San Francisco and in LA, Armad and Reliant and the work they're doing, or Universal Standard Housing, these people are like, they're breaking the ice because in our industry, very few people want to be the first guy in. Sometimes they're okay with being the second guy in, more and most comfortable being the third guy in, and I'm going to let somebody else try this and fall on her sword before I take this on. But I think we have the opportunity to build momentum and get, and then have more people enter that space. Because I'll say this, my plug line, and I'll leave with this, is We need the market-driven solution if we have ever going to have a prayer to dig our way out of this crisis.
Sorry, you were interrupted.
Yeah, I was making my big pitch too. We need a market-driven solution for attainable housing, or we'll never build ourselves out of this hole.
Thank you. Karin.
Let's see, just back to Terrence for a second. Honestly, some of the stuff you're talking about, I didn't even know what it is, so I'm excited to look at your video. But in terms of smart technology, absolutely, I think clearly we have an enormous way to go. And prefab, we keep trying to go that direction, and the costs just are not significant.
Doing grab and go. You're not.
Jill, can you turn on? Can you mute?
Okay, that's we're one of your so.
Jill,
writing that, and we were.
And then just overall, I think because this ties into so many things that we've been talking about today, but we as architects, we have to get more involved.
I figure
showing and trying to sell these ideas that we obviously are all on the same page about to everybody. So like, you know, our developers, the lenders, the city people, and because we have
our partner with you guys.
Because we have these abilities to make, you know, to show things visually. I think the thing is when we talk about stuff, you know, most of those people, they have no idea what we're talking about. So really showing
just grab and go.
And even if it's examples from, you know, what they're doing in Europe to examples of here's how things are done in our buildings here, here's how it can change. And like when Julie said, you know, and it kind of hit home when she said some of the ideas in my thing were not new. They're absolutely not new. We need to really, but they're still new to all of these people who have no idea what we're talking about. And we have to visualize it and sell it to them and to really get involved with that higher level and not just stay in our little architect bubble.
Thank you very much. And sorry about the interruption. Julie, closing remarks.
So I'm 100% in support of the dreamers and count myself in that category. But from this conversation, it seems remarkably clear to me that we need more transparency about who controls what parts of the system. So maybe the challenge here is to try and clarify who's making the rules for what. Where is it the funders? Where is it the planners? Where is it the planning regulations? Not planners, because I agree with Stephanie. The planners themselves are on our side. Where is the building code not working in our favor? Where are all of the things to do it? Now, that to me would allow us to actually get to the dream faster, because unless we understand the animal we're dealing with, and it's all messed up in people's minds. It's messed up in my mind. I've been in this for a long time. I don't think we're going to make a lot of headway, because we actually have to change the institutional approach to be able to allow for the experimentation we all want. So I say keep dreaming, and I think the idea that we can get something positive out of this strange time that we're in would be fantastic. And if there was ever a better time to do it, I can't think one that would be better than now, because I think there's momentum to make things happen.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was an amazing discussion. Our seventh in the 7-part series will be on hospitality on August 27th. So I encourage you all to join us for that. But with this, I'm going to unmute everybody. We're going to do a round of applause, and we really appreciate everyone's participation here. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you so much.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Julie and Karin.
Yeah, Julie, I'm in charge of the silver lining. A Pollyanna, the unrealistic optimism.
Oh, no, you got to do it, please.
If anybody has any ideas about the global question I have, I would really appreciate any examples anyone has.
Thank you,
Karin.
You go to different places, and there's all these great ideas that are really hard to implement in the United States.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Still would like to learn from them. Yeah.
like in Sweden, they, you know, the way they do inclusionary housing is they give money to developers to add affordability to their projects.
Huh.
That's
right,
the
well-
opposite. It's inclusionary, but it's in, you know, well, they just require it. So, but that way the pro forma works. You know, you do your pro forma and you go, if you want this rental level, this is how much government subsidy we need, and then they get it and they build it. And but then, interestingly enough, in Sweden, one of the reasons their experiment worked, or didn't work, it didn't work as badly as they thought it would of not, you know, shutting down for the pandemic, is that 50% of the households are single in the country.
Wow.
50%. So every place is different.
Yeah. That's what makes it interesting to learn from.
Okay.
LA's a complicated place.
Yeah.
We will continue the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Bye.
you.
The meeting. Take care, everybody. Good
Bye.
morning.